Good Saturday morning. This is again the Romans. Okay, I'm going to read it to you. It's reinforcing what I just said. It just uses a different language, okay? But I'll read it to you. It says, "Now there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has freed you from the law of sin and death. For what the law, weakened by the flesh, was powerless to do, this God has done. By sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for the sake of sin, he condemned sin in the flesh, so that the righteous decree of the law might be fulfilled in us, who live not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh are concerned with things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit with things of the Spirit. The concern of the flesh is death, but the concern of the Spirit is life and peace. For the concern of the flesh is hostility toward God. It doesn't submit to the law of God, nor can it. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But you are not in the flesh. On the contrary, you are in the Spirit, if only the Spirit of God dwells in you. Whoever does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. But if Christ is in you, although the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is alive because of righteousness. If the Spirit of the one who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, the one who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also, through his Spirit that dwells in you." I think one of the most important parts of that is the word flesh. It's got to be done very, very carefully. Flesh versus spirit. I think in history of Christianity, those two terms have been terribly misunderstood. Maybe I'm wrong and others are going to criticize me for it. Go ahead. But when Christ was talking about your body, he wasn't using the word flesh. He uses the word your mortal body. You see? Flesh are all the forces of work that are vicious. All the negative forces of vice. The Spirit is the quintessential opposite. The Spirit is the spirit of virtue, as opposed to selfishness. The flesh is the essence of selfishness. These are moral terms, not physical terms. The history of Christianity, because it borrowed from the Greeks, and it's inseparable here. They would have got it, and they may have misunderstood it too. I don't know. But there was a stark distinction between body and soul in Greek thought, and the salvation of the soul. You hear that language, okay? And the body was a source of this. That's Plato. With a vengeance, that's Plato. And Neoplatonism, where the body is the source of distraction. The mind is the source of order and beauty. You see? It's not hard to see that the Christian world would embrace those extremes. The soul versus the body. That's not what St. Paul is saying here. It's not the soul opposed to the body. It's flesh against spirit. It's selfishness against generosity, if it were. It's vice against virtue. That's what he's describing. You see, that was very much misunderstood. And I'll tell you where it was misunderstood in so many ways was in monasticism, where you had such a penitential approach to the body. Yeah, this is simply the truth. Where the church condemned it, actually, but it was still practiced. A lot of abusive practices of literally torturing the body. Self-imposed torture. It becomes a form of fanaticism in a way, a degradation of the body, the doing of penance in some ways. Yeah. I have to say, among our Passionist community, I've never seen that. But by the time I joined the order, that kind of extremity was already going away. There were guys, I think, historically, I saw where some men wore these spiked chains under their habit and were torturing themselves. That stuff was never approved by the church, but practiced. It's a form of spiritual dualism, the war against soul and body. That was more Greek than it was Jewish. Jews never did that, nor is it Christian. But it creeps up historically off and on in the history of Christianity. And it takes its most extreme forms in monasticism and in the convents. Self-abnegation, fasting to an extreme. there's nothing wrong with fasting. Fasting is very good as a discipline. It's a virtue. But once it becomes excessive, think the Greeks. You go too far, it becomes a horrible vice. Should there be penitential practices? Sure. One of them is exercise. It's good to do push-ups, to jog, to put your body through the exercises. It's life-giving. It can also be fanatical to the point that it is self-destructive. That's the truth. You see, there's the Greeks. That's Aristotle. Virtue lies in between excesses, too much or too little. You see? It's not between body and soul. It's between virtue and vice. See? I think that's extremely important. Thankfully, we don't have that kind of preaching anymore. You don't have that kind of bodily abnegation where they're attacking the body. The body's a source of evil. Hell, it is. We're human. We're human, but we are humans in need of discipline and restraint. You see? We're in need of virtue, and virtue comes through praxis, through practice, and overcoming certain emotional drives, or at least overcoming them in the sense of disciplining them, not eliminating them, but rendering them disciplined, virtuous. Okay? To feel pleasure at the right time in the right way to the right degree. To feel pain at the right time in the right degree. We should be pained by evil. We should, not fanatically, we should feel pain at what is evil. That is, we should react not just intellectually, but morally and physically to what we see in the world as evil, whether in ourselves or someone else, but not fanatically. We should rejoice in virtue, rejoice in beauty. Okay? We hone the virtues, and we discipline the vices. We'll try to eliminate the vices in the course of a lifetime of discipline under God's grace, or with God's grace, and also human wisdom, prudence. You don't need to have God's grace to go out and jog, but don't jog 40 miles, unless you're a long-distance runner. You get it? There's a man who jogs every day at the place where I ride my bike. I've seen him everywhere. He's there every day, and I see him there from anywhere. I get there between 9 and noon, okay? Someplace in between for 45 minutes. I've seen him there almost every day. That means I'm seeing him at different times. This guy is a long-distance runner, okay? Yeah, in magnificent physical condition. I try to do that. You can pick me up off the ground, you see? Anyway, it's the life of virtue, okay? It's what I see. It's the life of virtue. When the language is used by the Romans, flesh against spirit, he's talking about vice against virtue. That's all he's saying, and that's a lot to say. We are really called to a virtuous way of life, not the life of the flesh, vice. See? I have to say, though, in monasticism, that excess did occur a lot in history. And the church condemned it a lot, but still got practiced. It's a form of fanaticism, moral fanaticism. It's not the gospel. It's a form of insanity, to be honest about it. This is not the problem of Paul to the Romans. He knew the difference between flesh and spirit. He was talking about the virtues and the vices of the soul, and he was right.